Welcome back to Ben Leo tonight. This weekend marks 3 months since President Assad was toppled and forced to flee Syria. He was replaced, of course, by the Islamist and al-Qaeda-linked groups Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And despite concerns about the political future they may offer Syrians, global leaders, including our very own Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, he made assurances that civilians and minorities would be protected under the new regime.
I welcome the fact that Assad has gone. The Syrian people had to put up with his brutal regime for far, far too long. We're talking to regional allies. It's very important now that there's a political settlement, a political way forward, and it's very, very important that we emphasise that civilians and minorities must be protected in this process. But very, very pleased that Assad has fallen.
Well, 3 months exactly since those assurances, Syrian security services and affiliated gunmen have murdered hundreds of civilians, largely from Christian and Alawite religious minorities, and that's according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Government forces are said to be targeting minority groups as revenge against the former regime. President Assad himself was from the minority Alawite community, and one Syrian Christian this week told Fox News in America, "They want to kill all of us. They don't want us in Syria. We have to flee Syria." They're seeking revenge from the former regime. I'm asking for protection and to live in dignity because we can be killed at any moment. Well, I'm joined now by Catholic journalist and commentator Caroline Farrow in the studio. Caroline, good evening. Sorry to have you in here under these horrific circumstances. Have you seen, I mean, there's a litany of videos online of, which we can't show you on air, of course, but Christians being executed in the streets, being made to crawl on their hands and knees like dogs. Really horrific scenes. What do you make of all this? It's a big fat mess. It's
horrific, it's horrendous, and it's no surprise. So my organisation, CitizenGO, back in December, we were drawing attention about what was happening to the UN. So bear in mind, in 2011, 10% of the Syrian population were Christian. Now it's around 3%. And even at Christmas, we were hearing reports of churches being burned down, religious symbols like crosses being desecrated, priests being executed, religious sisters being forced into Islamic dress. So what's happened over the weekend is obviously an escalation, and a horrible escalation, but we were warning of this in December and saying to the UN, you must speak up for the Christians, you must protect their human rights. We had a petition to the UN. We asked for their Syrian envoy and their special rapporteur on religious freedom to stand up for the Christians, because it's no good. The group that's in charge in Syria, HTS, they're an Islamic they're an Islamic terrorist group. They're on a terrorist list. Well,
they were billing themselves, rebranding, Jelani, who's the head, rebranding themselves as the moderate jihadis. David Lammy threw them £50 million in aid in December, amongst other world leaders and foreign secretaries. And you even had, Caroline, the likes of Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart on their podcast going to Syria to interview Jelani and making out he's this sort of moderate, reformed jihadi. So what's happened here? What's gone wrong?
It's just sickening. And, what is it with the Labour Party and the left sort of aligning themselves with terrorists?
There they are on screen now. So that's Alistair Campbell there. Jelani's in the middle. He is the leader of HTS, this new group in Syria. The moderate jihadis, not so moderate, who are executing Syrians.
What does that even mean, a moderate jihadi? You have to remember that a leopard doesn't change its spots. This guy was in charge of al-Qaeda, and suddenly he's saying, no, it's fine, I'll put on a Western suit, trust me, Governor. There is no way that we should have trusted this individual. And also, we know what's happening. It's in... What everybody's worried about was that in 2015 there was a big refugee crisis in Europe, that 1.5 million refugees trying to get out of Syria. So we're trying to avoid another refugee crisis. And the way that they're trying to do that is by legitimizing HTS, by funding them. And, we've got another campaign going that on Tuesday, the European Parliament is debating humanitarian aid to Syria. Now, the EU is the biggest provider of humanitarian aid. So actually, we need to really lobby the EU, or Europeans need to lobby their MEPs to say, you should not be giving any money to HTS. You should be making sure that any funds that pass through Syria, they are not linked to HTS, and also you link them to absolute firm guarantees of protection for Christians and the Alawites and any other minority in the area. Otherwise, you're not getting any aid.
Caroline, tell me about the persecution of Christians, not just in Syria, but all over the world, because I hear many stories from the likes of Africa, especially. Apparently 16 million Christians are being persecuted, murdered in droves. Is Christianity under attack? And is there a spotlight on it?
I think in certain areas of the world it is. I think in Nigeria, Christians are under attack in certain areas of Nigeria. In the Congo, we heard recently, you know, there were 70 people beheaded in a local church. You know, in certain areas of the world...
You never hear about this stuff, though, do you? On the mainstream media, you never hear about it.
No, and there's two reasons for that. Well, I think there's a reason why we haven't heard about Syria, but generally speaking, it's because we as a society have become so unpinned from our cultural moorings that when we hear of Christians, and we've sort of got so much self-hatred, that when we hear of Christians being persecuted, we don't seem to care, or we seem to say, oh, there's always two sides to every story. Oh, Christians, they have a persecution complex. Whereas any other minority being genocided, you know, where are the marches on the streets? Where are the marches for these Christians? Where are the protests outside the embassy? What's happening? Absolute tumbleweed. You
said that there was a reason why the Syria situation hadn't been covered, really, as of yet in this country. I think, actually, in actual fact, without patting myself on the back, because it's nothing to be congratulated about, but I think GB News tonight is the first news broadcaster to cover this. What is the reason, as far as you're concerned?
Well, firstly, I think, you know, other outlets are too concerned with just cultural fluff. You know, look at what the BBC's putting out there, saying something about drag queens, no doubt. But generally speaking, this is a mess that has been caused by the West. Let's be really clear. You know, the West has funded the group that is now in power because they were so keen to see Assad fall. So you had the US, you had Biden administration funding these militants. You had Israel, I'm afraid to say, they were funding the militants too. And so now everybody's got egg on their face and everyone's so distracted with Ukraine, they don't actually want to see what's happening in Syria. And I've seen President Trump say, you know, express the point of view that maybe this is a war going on somewhere else and that Americans shouldn't worry about it. But actually, Syria is a pressure cooker. It's a tinderbox. And if we don't get on top of it, we've got al-Qaeda on the rise, and America knows only too well the damage, you know, look at 9/11, the damage that a terrorist state can unleash. So we really need to get on top of this. Europe needs to get on top of this. And we need to actually get a grip. And if you look at what's happening, you know, you've got insurgents in Jordan. The Jordan border's not secure. You've got Turkey. They're fighting the Kurds in the north. So Turkey have funded this new regime as well. And you've got al-Qaeda in the east sort of rising up. So we really need to get a grip and say, you know, this is not acceptable. We do not prop up a terrorist state.
What do you expect the government to do now? What would you urge them to do? Because they've been so steadfast in, as I said, lumping aid to HTS and Jelani. What should they do now? Do you think they'll just ignore it? Well,
the US, actually, Marco Rubio released a statement 6 hours ago saying this is unacceptable. You know, we stand with these persecuted minorities. This violence has to stop. I think it wouldn't harm the British government. It wouldn't hurt Keir Starmer to actually say something about the Christians in Syria. I don't know why there's been this silence. So they firstly must speak out really, really strongly. And secondly, they must put all diplomatic efforts not into legitimizing a terrorist regime, but all their diplomatic efforts into protecting the minorities and stabilising Syria. You know, they need to put their money where their mouth is instead of trying to sort of rehabilitate this guy.
David Lammy did tweet about it 5 hours ago. He said something akin to, I can't remember the verbatim tweet, but he mentioned it without mentioning the word Christian. He called it. He called it persecuted minorities. Didn't mention the word Christian. And it's a great point about repeating the same mistakes. This reminds me of Libya. Yes. You know, Hillary Clinton and the French going into Libya, laughing about it, that infamous clip of Clinton laughing about we came, we saw, we killed Gaddafi. What a mess Libya became after that, the slave hellhole of the world. So, yeah, it just feels like history repeats itself.
Well, I mean, I think there's shades of Srebrenica here. I think as well there are... look what happened in Rwanda in 1994 when everyone was silent. We cannot be silent any longer.
Caroline Farrow, thank you for your company tonight. Sorry it's under these circumstances, but I'm sure we'll be getting you back to keep us updated on this really important issue. Thank you, Caroline.